I'm the tax pro, and today we're going to talk about what standards we use when we do small business accounting. So, what do I mean by standards? I'll get a lot of questions like, well, how do I know what can be expensed? How do I know what I can write off? How do I know what needs to be capitalized into an asset? And a lot of people will ask me, like, are there certain regulations I'm supposed to be following? The answer is yes. Yes, there is. But you may get some conflicting information if you just go and Google. So I want to make sure that you understand what we're actually teaching in the course. And you may have other requirements. Okay? So keep in mind that this course is for US based companies, right? So we're doing US based companies. We're not doing like companies in Canada. We're not doing foreign companies. This is for US based companies. US based companies, it depends on your ownership structure and how you manage your company, what standards you're following. Okay. GAAP is the generally accepted accounting principles. And GAAP is the standardized framework that accountants use for US based companies that are publicly traded. Okay? So GAAP is our publicly traded framework. So Google, Apple, Tesla, all of those publicly traded companies where I can go and I can purchase stock in these companies, they follow GAAP, okay? GAAP is a US-based standard. IFRS is the international standard that a lot of different countries use. It's close to GAAP, they're not the same. GAAP is US-based, okay? GAAP is kind of complicated. So GAAP is the framework that is used for publicly traded companies. Now, when we report to the IRS, we are using framework set in place by the Internal Revenue Code, or the IRC. So the IRS uses the IRC. And the Internal Revenue Code, or the IRC, is what we use to calculate what we owe for taxes, okay? GAAP and the IRC are not the same. So I'll have a lot of small business owners that are like, what am I supposed to use? What should I be keeping my books on? I'm a little bit confused, okay? And the answer is going to be it depends. Just like everything in accounting is, it really depends, okay? If you are a small business, most likely you are going to go with the IRC, which is the Internal Revenue Code. Probably not going to use GAAP. The reason being is because GAAP is complicated. GAAP requires a lot of adjustments. GAAP requires you to keep your books in one standard, and then you have to adjust those books for your tax return. You have to adjust it to the IRC and report to the IRS the differences. And then on your actual financial statements, you have a book to tax difference adjustment that you make. Okay, it's really complicated. In general, small businesses in the US do not need to follow GAAP. And I say in general because there's exceptions. Okay, the exceptions would be if you are entering into an agreement with some sort of organization that requires you to follow GAAP, such as if you become a government contractor. If you become a government contractor, you may be required to utilize GAAP and to keep your books on a GAAP basis. GAAP is different from the IRC, so some small businesses will be required to set their business up in GAAP, like from a GAAP basis. Other ways that you may want to kind of like follow more of a GAAP basis would be if you are planning on getting a bunch of investors, or not even a bunch of investors, but if you're planning on getting investors, you might need to be on GAAP basis, okay? The reason we have GAAP is because GAAP provides us with a standard framework so that we can compare financials from one company to another. Okay, so it allows us to compare companies in a way that gives us a standard. So we know when we compare net income at this company to net income at this company, they're measured the same way. Okay, it's really important for publicly traded companies because can you imagine trying to make a decision about Apple or Google? So you're like, which one do I buy? Which stock do I buy, Apple or Google? But their statements are different standards. So you would then be essentially comparing apples to oranges rather than apples to apples, right? So that's why we have GAAP. It is to protect the interest of investors in publicly traded companies. Now, it can also be used to protect the interest of like the government if you're a government contractor, okay? So when we go through this course, what I'm going to do is we are going to base it off of the Internal Revenue Code, and then there will be additional resources on GAAP, okay? Generally, most businesses will just go with the IRC. Now, the IRC is flexible, so you may find that the IRC or the Internal Revenue Code doesn't actually vary that much from GAAP. There are some differences, but in the grand scheme of things, if you have a business that is following GAAP, you might not really have that many adjustments to go from GAAP to the IRC. Okay, so I will explain the differences. Accounting, especially when it comes to the Internal Revenue Code, you have options. A lot of people don't realize that. They're like, well, there should be one way to do this. It's not always the case. Okay, for example, in small businesses, we can elect to be taxed on a cash basis or we can elect to be taxed on an accrual basis. So you can have cash or accrual. With that in mind, like GAAP is only accrual. But the IRC allows us to have some flexibility depending on your revenue levels. So we're going to talk about different options that you may have anyways. And when we talk about those different options, I'll also bring in GAAP sometimes. But I just want you to be aware that there are different reporting standards. GAAP being one of them. GAAP is going to be important if you plan on bringing on certain types of investors or if you ever plan on going public. At that point in time, GAAP is extremely important. The Internal Revenue Code, on the other hand, is very important because we want to make sure that your taxes are correct and that we are in compliance with tax regulations. So I just want you to be aware of GAAP versus the Internal Revenue Code. For those of you that are asking what framework am I even supposed to be following, what standards are we following with my small business, this is the answer. We're going to follow GAAP and or the Internal Revenue Code. Most likely if you are a small business in the US, we're going to follow the Internal Revenue Code, okay? GAAP, though, does have its place in small business, not as common as the Internal Revenue Code. Okay, so to recap really quick, GAAP and the Internal Revenue Code are two different things, two different sets of standards that we tend to follow in the US for small businesses, the Internal Revenue Code being far more popular than GAAP. GAAP stands for Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. The IRC stands for Internal Revenue Code. Okay? Internal Revenue Code is what governs how we complete taxes. GAAP is what governs how we present publicly traded companies. GAAP can be important for small businesses if you're like a government contractor or if you plan on bringing on specific types of investors and or potentially going public one day. So that's where GAAP comes into play. So that's a general breakdown. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I will see you guys in the next video. If you could do me a favor and like and subscribe, I would really appreciate it. It tells YouTube that you like our content, and it helps us make money helping you for free. So I will see you guys in the next video.